Why do United Methodists have a book of discipline and not a book of law or a book of order? It's a bit old-fashioned now, but it wasn't so long ago that you could say that when you wanted to study under a highly skilled practitioner, that you entered under the discipline of a master pianist or a skilled surgeon. And those who learned from such a practitioner were, and often still are, called that person's disciples. A disciple was someone who learned from a master practitioner, of course, but not just learned, but emulated, tried to follow along in the way of life of that master practitioner. It's that sense of the word discipline that I think applies with our own book of discipline. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we are all students of the master teacher, and we all seek to emulate Jesus Christ and to walk together in a shared way of life that we have in him. You will sometimes hear the book of discipline referred to as a book of covenant, a book of rules, or even a book of law, and it has aspects of all three of those things. I think that the aspect of the discipline we most need to hold on to today, most need to take advantage of, is the idea of the book of discipline as something that documents our shared way of life in Jesus Christ. We need to remember that this shared way of Christ is something we have in common with all United Methodists. But it is also something we have in common with Christians from all backgrounds. In just Jesus Christ, we are united in this way of life. Not everything in the book of discipline has equal weight. There are different sections and different parts. And in general, the weight of something is given by the ease or the difficulty to change it. For example, most of the discipline can be changed with a simple majority vote of a general conference, which usually meets every 4 years or every quadrennium. But some parts of the discipline require a higher standard. The Constitution, which is at the beginning of the book of discipline, requires a 2/3 majority vote of the general conference, and also a 2/3 majority vote of the votes of all members of all annual conferences in order to be changed. But within the Constitution, there's actually an even higher standard. 2 paragraphs 17 and 18, which are sometimes called the first and second restrictive rules. To change the first and second restrictive rules requires not only a 2/3 majority vote of the General Conference, but also a 3/4 majority vote of all the voters of the annual conferences. What's in the first and second restrictive rules? Well, they protect our articles of religion and our confession of faith, 2 of our doctrinal standards. And they say that they cannot be changed and that we cannot add to them or take away from them. Our denomination believes that the General Conference ought to be able to change many things about the discipline from one quadrennium to the next, but that some things, the constitutional issues, should be guarded carefully, and that even some things within that, our doctrinal standards, are of such a high state that we must be careful not to change them at all. In effect, changing them is to create a new church, and so the difficulty of changing them is commensurate with their importance. Sometimes these documents are called the foundational documents even, although the discipline term tends to be doctrinal standards. There are actually 5 doctrinal standards in the book of discipline. There are the articles of religion and the confession of faith, and there are also 3 others. These are all listed in section 3 of the book of discipline. Here are the 5 doctrinal standards or foundational documents in our book of discipline. First, the articles of religion and the confession of faith. The Articles of Religion were given by John Wesley to the Methodist Episcopal Church in 1784. The Confession of Faith comes from the Evangelical United Brethren Church. Both of these documents are written out in full in the discipline, and they contain short statements on important topics of doctrine. Hopefully, in this session, you'll have the opportunity to discuss in your group articles from the Article of Religion and the Confession of Faith concerning the church. The third document is John Wesley's Standard Sermons. The Standard Sermons are actually not a single document, but a set of sermons, and they cover a wide range of topics. They are not in the Book of Discipline, but they are available online. And the fourth are John Wesley's explanatory notes on the New Testament. Like his sermons, these are not written out in the Book of Discipline, but they are available online. Both of these are not in the discipline because of their length. The fifth of our foundational documents or doctrinal standards is the general rules of the Methodist Church, also given to the Methodist Episcopal Church by John Wesley. These general rules offer advice or even ways of living for daily life as Christians, and they can be summarized in 3 points. First, do no harm. Second, do all the good you can. And third, attend upon the ordinances of God, which I like to say is 18th century English for keep up with the basics of following Jesus, doing things like praying, reading the Bible, and receiving Holy Communion. How should we understand the place of the doctrinal standards or foundational documents, their role in the book of discipline? Here I would return to something I said at the beginning. I said that our book of discipline documents a shared way of life for those of us who call ourselves United Methodists. And I think that that's a good place to start for understanding what their role is in our life. These foundational documents deepen our connections with each other and with other Christians. How so? Well, first of all, these foundational documents or doctrinal standards connect us with our past. The confession of faith comes from the Evangelical United Brethren Church, and it reminds us that the United in United Methodist comes from that tradition. The confession of faith reflects the Evangelical United Brethren Church's own ideas and past, which extends all the way back to the 1700s. The other 4 foundational documents all come from John Wesley, who, with his brother Charles Wesley, was one of the co-founders of Methodism in England. These foundational documents help remind us that we have this past and keep us tied to it in important ways. Since 1968, there have been roughly a dozen or so books of discipline or editions of the Book of Discipline, but these foundational documents have remained the same. Second, our foundational documents, our doctrinal standards, also connect us with Christians from other denominations, Methodist and otherwise. Many of us recite in church on Sunday mornings an affirmation of faith like the Apostles' Creed. We have more in common with the faith of other Christians than we have differences. And our differences, although they are listed out in some way in our articles of religion, in our confession of faith, in our foundational documents, they are meant to spur discussion and conversation and not just to set ourselves apart from other Christians. This is one of the reasons that United Methodists are very active in ecumenical work, in work that happens between and among Christians of various doctrines, both in formal dialogues with other denominations, but also in ministry work. We have more in common than we have differences. Third, our doctrinal standards also deepen our connections with each other. These are not just standards for preachers or pastors. They are for all of us. When we become members of the United Methodist Church, we accept responsibility for our shared way of life together. We covenant with each other to walk as we have agreed to walk through the baptism, through receiving the grace of Jesus Christ together, of being in community with each other. And these doctrinal standards, these formational documents, they give us some meat on that bone. They give some flesh to our promises so that they aren't just empty promises to each other. Here I would say that the most important thing to recall in all of this is that these doctrinal standards are not just something for us to open up to point to each other about whether we are right or wrong about particular issues. Our doctrinal standards point to a larger shared way of life. Our mission, our doctrine, and our way of life all belong together. They are not 3 different things, but rather one thing together in faithful discipleship of Jesus Christ. And we need to remember this wider whole when we work with the discipline, when we turn to it, when we open its pages. We need to remember this wider whole of mission, doctrine, and life. In a sense, you could say that our doctrine leads to our mission, and our mission focuses or gives direction to our life together. Or you could say that our life together and our mission is our lived or lived out doctrine. Either way, our mission, our doctrine, and our life together are not three separate things. They are three parts of a greater whole, which is faithful discipleship of Jesus Christ. Whenever we open the book of discipline, we want to keep this greater whole in mind. We ought to use the discipline to deepen our connections with each other so that we can all grow in discipleship. Charles Wesley, in his hymn, All Praise to Our Redeeming Lord, number 554 in your hymnal, says, Christ bids us build each other up, and gathered into one, to our high calling's glorious hope, we hand in hand go on. May we receive our foundational documents, our doctrinal standards, in that spirit.